Hey friends, tonight we begin the disturbing rituals of lost Arctic expeditions, 14th century. So before you get too cozy, take a second to like the video and subscribe. But only if this kind of slow night talk feels right to you. Now turn down the lights, let the noise outside fade, and let's settle into tonight's story together. As you let your breath slow and your thoughts drift beyond familiar borders, picture a world without sound. Not silence, but the kind of hush that waits. A hush with memory, a hush with weight. Imagine a horizon that never moves, and a sky that refuses color. Now imagine men, well-fed, uniformed, certain, stepping willingly into that quiet. It is 1845. Two British ships, Erebus and Terror, slip out of the gray waters of the Thames and into the Atlantic mist. On board, charts, rations, polished brass, optimism sewn into every flag. Their task? To find the Northwest Passage, that elusive artery through Arctic stone and sea. To make a path where ice had claimed every name before them. They do not plan to fail. But by winter of 1846, they are icebound. Somewhere near King William Island, the ships vanish from the world. No word, no flare, no signal. And back in England, a strange kind of silence spreads. Not absence, but something heavier. Like a bell that never rings again, but keeps echoing. On the ice, things begin to change. At first, the crew keep order. Bells toll morning and night. Logs are written with steady hands. Meals are rationed, prayers whispered. Evenings bring games, songs, chess. But the ice does not move. Not forward, not back. It holds. By the 40th day, silence begins creeping into the seams. One man forgets his own birthday. Another sees a bird circling overhead where no bird should fly. A spoon is found bent in a shape no one can replicate. A candle burns longer than its wick. They begin to mark these things, not in logs, but in ash on the floor, in scratches behind the sleeping bunks. Quiet symbols, some circles, some spirals, some eyes. They say nothing, because the words feel heavier than before. Then the cairn appears. At first it's nothing more than a stack of stones near the edge of the ice. Someone must have built it, but no one claims to. It's not large, not imposing, but it draws the eye. Each morning it seems subtly different. A rock repositioned, a new object at its base, a toothpick, a button, a coin smoothed by hands. Soon men begin leaving things there deliberately, always just before dawn, always alone, never more than a minute. A ritual is forming, though no one names it. It feels necessary. They call it the place. One day the ship's bell tolls without cause, not once, but 3 times. Each note distant, hollow, as if coming not from the deck, but from beneath. The men gather, uncertain. The captain inspects the clapper. It hasn't moved. The cord is still tied. No breeze stirs. That night no one sings. Instead, they sit in a tight circle below deck, not speaking. One man hums very softly, a tune no one recognizes but none interrupt. When it ends, they do not clap. They only breathe and listen, just as the wind shifts, and beneath it, not above but below the ice, comes a sound like something remembering. The sound beneath the ice came only once, low, drawn, like something ancient shifting in its sleep. None of the men claimed to have heard it, not in so many words, but that evening their movements changed. They stepped more lightly, spoke in half voice. One man began walking the deck in slow circles at dawn, head tilted to the horizon, as if waiting for someone to speak through the frost. The bell had not tolled again, yet the memory of it echoed. By the 12th week, the weather offered no variation. Gray sky, still air, cold not sharp but constant, like a weight on the lungs. The sea remained silent beneath its shell of ice. The ship stood fixed, sails furled like folded hands in prayer. They were not alone, or so it began to feel. Tracks appeared near the cairn, thin lines, not quite footprints, more like something dragged with intention. No wind had blown, no snow had fallen, and yet, each morning, the marks had shifted. New shapes began appearing in the snow, simple at first, crosses, arrows, rings, then more complex, spirals with tails, interlocking crescents, glyphs made of parallel lines, always in threes, always pointing away from the ships. Someone tried to erase one, only to find it frozen into the crust like glasswork. They stopped touching them after that. The offerings at the cairn became more deliberate. What once were lost buttons or bits of twine were now tokens, a silver cufflink, a folded page from a hymnal, a mirror no longer reflecting. No one announced their gifts. They were simply left. Each item was gone by morning. Some men took to keeping journals just for the cairn, not logs, those had thinned weeks ago, but sketches, musings, letters addressed to no one. One man drew a map with no landmarks, only a path curling inward, ending at a circle labeled in small print, "It waits." That night, he burned the page in a lantern. By the next morning, an identical drawing had been etched into the snow behind his bunk. He did not speak for 3 days. Others felt it too. The sense of being observed, not watched, but remembered. As if the place itself was listening, responding. The ice no longer seemed inert, but reactive. When they spoke, their words felt recorded. When they walked, their steps felt traced. Captain Crozier called a quiet assembly. No official log was made. No commands issued. He simply said, "It is not death that waits here. It is continuity." No one asked him to explain. Later, he was seen placing his wedding band at the cairn. That same night, a lantern on the ship refused to go out. Its flame held steady even when submerged briefly in snow. The cook, who had performed the test without speaking, left the lantern near the railing. It continued burning until morning, untouched. When he went to retrieve it, it was gone. In its place, a small, polished stone, flat as bone, warm to the touch. He did not cook the next day, or the next. But food still appeared at mealtimes, neatly arranged, quietly placed. No one claimed to have prepared it, and no one complained. The crew began to shift in rhythm. They awoke at the same time each night without prompting. Some sat upright in their cots for hours, unmoving. Others stood on the deck and looked out into the dark, even when there was no moon, no light. One man hummed for 7 hours. He did not tire, did not pause. Just one unbroken note, low, steady, human, until his voice gave out. When he stopped, the crew found frost shaped like spirals radiating from his boots. They melted by dawn. No one asked what he'd heard to sustain him so long. And when the bell tolled again, just once at the faintest edge of morning, they did not go looking. They simply stood still and listened. They began sealing off rooms. Not out of necessity, there were still spaces left untouched by the cold, but out of rhythm. One by one, cabins were closed, latched from the outside, lamps removed, curtains drawn, as if they had never been used. When asked why, no one answered. It simply felt right. The empty spaces were left unspoken, but always respected. Even in silence, the men seemed to remember which ones were gone. They adjusted their paths, stepping lightly past the doors, eyes lowered. The ship had grown quieter, not lifeless, just more aware of itself. In the mess hall, chairs were rearranged into a wide circle. No one sat at the head of the table anymore. Meals were served communally and in silence. Spoons moved in unison. Plates emptied without a word. The cook, now mute by choice, placed objects in the center: a pine cone, a small bell, once even a scrap of red cloth tied into a knot. These items remained untouched through the meal, then vanished by morning. No one asked how. The cairn, meanwhile, had grown, still no taller than a man's knee, but wider now. Flat stones stacked in precise balance, each layer more ornate. It began reflecting light in strange ways. Even under gray skies it shimmered faintly, as if dusted with crushed glass or fine frost. Some said they saw shapes in the reflection, not faces, but echoes, not movement, but intent. Crozier had not spoken in 4 days. His journal, once filled with tight entries, now bore only symbols: concentric circles, thin, radiating lines, diagrams of birds always drawn mid-turn, wings swept behind as if pulled backward. In the margins, single words in Latin, then Greek, then none at all. He no longer ate with the others, but food disappeared from outside his door each morning. Once a crewman slipped a note under his cabin: "Are we still leaving when the ice breaks?" The note was returned that evening, unfolded, blank. By now the men had stopped checking the compass, the needles had long ceased their spin. Instead they began watching the wind, not its direction, but its rhythm. There were pulses now: 3 gusts, pause; 5 gusts, longer pause, as if the sky itself had begun to speak in code. One man, a signalman by training, began recording the wind on scraps of sailcloth. He used bits of charcoal and old wax to draw the gusts in sequence. When asked what they meant, he whispered, "It's not for us. We're just the paper." Later that night he was seen standing barefoot on the ice, eyes open, not shivering. When they called to him, he smiled, then walked back on board, dry-footed, and slept for 16 hours. No one spoke of it. Another man painted his boots white, not with paint, but with whale fat and ash. He moved without sound, even on wood, began rearranging crates into geometric shapes at dawn, never the same, never explained. When a younger sailor tried to copy the pattern one morning, he was found hours later standing at the railing, head tilted, whispering to something below. He did not fall, but he did not speak again. Now the nights felt shorter, though no sun rose. Time had loosened. Sleep came in fragments. Waking felt like a continuation. Some men carved marks into their arms with the dull side of spoons, not to bleed, just to feel the echo of shape. They called it scripture. The lines faded but were redrawn each day, and when the wind stopped, truly stopped, for 21 hours straight, a stillness fell over the crew like prayer. That night they all gathered around the cairn without signal or command. Even Crozier. He stood at the center, palms up, eyes open, and from beneath the cairn, not from it but from below, came the faintest sound. Not a voice, not a bell, but the beginning of something forming a word. No one could repeat the sound. They tried, of course, quietly, alone, beneath their breath. A few even wrote it phonetically, or tried to, on torn bits of sailcloth or between margins of old logs. But the letters would fade, not smudge, not wear, but vanish entirely, as if the sound refused transcription. Crozier did not try to speak it. He simply touched the cairn once, then walked below deck. His footsteps echoed longer than they should have. That night a new ritual emerged. Again, no one named it. No one invented it. It simply began. A single man would rise during the first hours of what might have been night, wrap himself in sailcloth, and walk the deck in 3 slow circles, each turn slower than the last. At the end he would stop beside the main mast, face inland, though no land was visible, and hum a single sustained note. The next night someone else did the same. By the 7th night it was understood. The ritual chose its own. No one volunteered. No one refused. Even the ice seemed to recognize the motion. Tiny cracks spidered outward from beneath the mast, each no wider than a hair. When touched, they felt warm. Once a man pressed his ear to one and whispered, "It's like being remembered by the sea." They didn't speak of that again. The food had changed. Nothing new had been brought aboard, yet textures shifted. Biscuits crumbled more softly, as if baked hours ago. The salt pork no longer stung the tongue, but melted like fruit. Even the water, always metallic, always cold, now tasted of something familiar and forgotten. Some swore it reminded them of snow from childhood. Others said it tasted like breath on a window pane. No one questioned it. Instead, they began giving thanks. Not loudly, not publicly, but in gestures, a finger to the brow, a slow blink before eating, the tying of a red thread around a wrist. It was enough. Then came the whispers. At first, only one man heard them, or admitted to. He was a cartographer, half blind from frostbite, who spent most days sketching with charcoal on the inside of barrels. He said the whispers came from the bulkheads, faint, layered, as if a crowd of voices were all trying to speak a single word at once. He did not seem frightened, only curious. He asked if anyone remembered a name they'd never heard before. When no one answered, he nodded and returned to his drawing. The next morning, he was gone. Not missing, simply gone. No prints on the deck, no note, no rope lowered over the side. His drawings remained, though, arranged in a perfect spiral inside his quarters, each one showing the same thing, a doorway made of ice, with 3 dark figures standing beyond it, arms folded. The door was always ajar. In its center, a symbol no one could describe, not because they didn't recognize it, but because they could not hold it in mind. Like smoke shaped into meaning, then gone. The room was never entered again. They sealed it with sailcloth, dipped in ash, tied 3 times. After that, no more whispers were heard aloud, but men began waking with words in their mouths. Not English, not Latin, not anything remembered. They didn't write them down. They didn't share. But they each sat quietly for hours after, as if something sacred had passed through them and left its outline. One man wept, just once, then smiled for 3 days. The cairn had stopped changing. It no longer accepted offerings. Items left at its base remained untouched. Even the snow around it had hardened, unmoved by wind or warmth, as if it had finished becoming what it was meant to be. Still, the men gathered near it each morning, not in worship, not in fear, but in alignment. And once, just once, when the wind returned, it carried with it a scent no one could name, like wood that had never burned or flowers that only bloomed before memory. It lingered for hours, and then the sun rose, only for a moment. But it rose. They did not speak of the sun, not that day, not the next, not ever again. It had risen only briefly, a thin arc at the edge of the horizon, low and golden, refracting off the ice in strange prisms. No warmth came from it. No shadows moved. But its appearance shifted something, not in the world, but in the men. From that moment on, none of them closed their eyes entirely. Even in sleep, their lids remained half-drawn, like watchers in vigil. The light never returned, but neither did full darkness. Instead, the sky settled into a twilight that never ended, a blue too shallow to be night, too worn to be day, the kind of light found in dreams before waking. In this light, the ships looked older, not aged, altered. The wood took on a hue like drift bone, no longer rich brown, but pale and almost soft to the touch. Brass fittings no longer shone, but pulsed gently like breathing skin. Nails curled subtly at their tips, bending away from the grain. The names Erebus and Terror, once carved into the bows, began to blur, not erased, but becoming unreadable, as if even the ships were shedding identity. Still they floated. Still they held, though no one dared measure the ice anymore. Instead, they measured time in gestures. One man tapped 3 fingers on the rail each morning. Another folded his blanket 13 times before sleep. One rubbed his palms with snow, then ash, then snow again. Each movement was private, deliberate, unspoken. If 2 men shared the same gesture, they did not mention it. There were no names for these things anymore, only practice. In the galley, meals had ceased, and yet no one starved. Plates still appeared, sometimes warm, sometimes cold, always sufficient. Never more, never less. Cups filled with water, sometimes clear, sometimes tinged faintly gold. One morning the plates bore slices of pear, soft, wet, impossibly fresh. No one remembered seeing a pear in years. Still, they ate, silently. No thanks were spoken, but many closed their eyes before the first bite. Some began sleeping in the hold, not for space nor for warmth. It was colder there than anywhere, but for sound. They claimed it was easier to hear the floor, not footsteps, not creaks, but something slower, deeper, a hum that rose and fell like breath through the bones of the ship, as if the vessel was listening too and remembering. Crozier remained apart. He no longer walked the deck, no longer wrote, no longer even blinked, it seemed. His presence had become ceremonial, like a statue placed to remind, not command. Yet the men passed by him with a reverence they did not offer the dead. One evening, he stood at the very edge of the ship, arms wide, head tilted slightly forward, as if bracing for a wind that never came. He remained that way until morning. When they looked again, he was seated, as if nothing had changed. But one of the nails near his post had turned to glass. They left it untouched. The cairn, though unchanged, began to sing, not with voice, not with melody, but when one stood close, the ears rang softly, a pitch too smooth to be heard but too strong to ignore. Each man heard it differently. Some said it matched their heartbeat. Others claimed it sounded like a place they had once been, long ago. A hallway, a stairwell, a room with curtains billowing. And one man, a boy really, whispered that it sounded like home, though he had been born at sea. They did not ask him to explain. Now the rituals had become instinct. No one remembered beginning them, but all performed them, even in sleep. One man, seen through a crack in the door, made symbols with his hands as he dreamt, fluid, circular movements, as if guiding a fish through deep water. Another was heard whispering numbers with every breath, not counting, but naming, each digit like a blessing. When asked why, he smiled and said, "So the ice will know who we are." That night, frost began to form in perfect spirals on the windows. Not random, not chaotic, but placed. And when morning came, a single word had formed in the frost on the captain's window, though no one could say what it meant, or if it was even a word at all. The frost on the captain's window did not melt, not with breath, not with heat. Lamps held against the glass only made the markings glow faintly, as if fed by the flame rather than broken by it. No one touched it. No one dared. The word, if it was one, remained suspended there for 3 days, pulsing softly in the half-light. On the 4th morning it was gone, not melted, not wiped, gone. In its place, a ring of water, perfectly circular with a single thread of red wool resting at its center. That was when the dreams began. They came not as stories, but as textures, felt, not seen, the scrape of bone on wood, the warmth of breath against bare hands. The weight of snow pressed into the folds of skin behind the knees. Each man awoke remembering a different part, none coherent, all vivid. One remembered a door, heavy with ice, that opened inward without sound. Another recalled floating, not in water but in something thicker, something that resisted and accepted all at once. A third said he had become a cairn himself, stone stacked on stone, breathless and still. They did not share these things aloud, but the silence among them deepened. In place of conversation there were glances, in place of songs, humming. Always the same tone, low, steady, almost subterranean. The ship's wheel had stopped turning, not locked, not frozen, still greased, still oiled, but resistant to touch. When one man attempted to rotate it, his hands trembled uncontrollably for the rest of the day. He wore gloves thereafter, even while eating. The others did not try again. The cairn's hum began to rise, slightly louder each day. Still not a song, but no longer just sensation. It began to possess rhythm, a tempo not unlike breathing, or waves, or footsteps. It wasn't unpleasant, just present. And it became clear that something, or someone, was listening in return. The compass was now an ornament. Its needle spun once every hour, then stopped, pointing toward the cairn. Always the cairn. Even when moved, even when taken below deck. One man placed it in a tin box lined with lead, and still, when opened, the needle was there again, aligned to the stones. At night the shadows changed shape, not length, not angle, but intent. They began to move even when the lanterns were still, to pulse faintly, to stretch toward the men's feet as they slept, coiling gently around boots and ankles before retracting. No one screamed, no one fled. There was no threat, only recognition, as though the darkness had begun to remember them. The journals now bore fewer words, instead symbols, repeated endlessly, some geometric, some organic, a spiral like a coiled fern, a triangle with no base, a line that twisted once, then vanished into itself. The meanings were never discussed, yet they appeared across multiple pages by different hands. One page bore only a phrase. It teaches us slowly, no name signed below. In the lower hold, a room was found filled with water. Clean, still, unfrozen. No leak was found, no source traced. Yet each morning it remained the same depth, knee-high, untouched, gently rippling even when sealed. Two men began sitting beside it for hours, not speaking, not watching, just breathing with it. They stopped eating, but did not weaken. Their skin paled to a faint opal hue. Their hair softened at the edges, as if turning to silk. One had a birthmark that slowly vanished over days, leaving his skin smooth as marble. They did not return to the upper decks. No one asked them to. And then the cairn split, not broke, not collapsed. Split, neatly, evenly, a clean seam down the center, as if it had been prepared to open. Inside, nothing. Not air, not shadow, nothing. But for a moment every man aboard felt his breath pulled softly inward, as though the ship itself had exhaled something that did not belong. And into that space they felt the world begin to shift. Not break, but turn. The split in the cairn never closed. Even under snow, wind, or ash, the seam remained precise. A line as thin as thread, but darker than any shadow. It did not widen, it did not shift, but it watched. That was the word the men found themselves thinking, though none dared speak it aloud. The opening did not stare, it remembered. They began to leave nothing at the cairn now, not even glances. It was there, always, but not for them anymore. Like a cathedral after service, or a door they had already stepped through. Their rituals turned inward, not in silence, but in stillness. Movements became precise, sacred. Buttons fastened in exact orders, boots arranged sole to sole, heels touching, beards trimmed by the angle of frost on the glass. These actions were no longer choices. They were rites, preserved, repeated. One man, a carpenter by trade, began carving tiny rings from bone, not decorative, not wearable, just rings, each smooth, each marked with a single dot, and placed in a line along the edge of his bunk. When asked why, he said only, to keep count of the forgetting. Another man took to sleeping beneath the stairs, not on them, beneath. He'd pull a blanket over his face and whisper a name, not his own, until sleep took him. When he emerged each morning, he'd place a drop of water on the lantern post and nod to no one in particular. They did not question it. The sky had become paler, the twilight no longer blue but bone-colored, a dimness that did not change with time, but felt like the memory of noon, flattened into stillness. In that light, shadows grew faint, but reflections deepened. Mirrors aboard the ship began to fog, not with breath, but with warmth, a heat from within. Looking into them no longer showed the face of the man who peered in, but a second too late, always a blink behind. It became known. No one spoke of mirrors after that. A lantern flickered without cause near the bow. When inspected, no fuel remained, only salt, packed firm inside the base. The flame held steady for 4 days. They left it burning. The boy, the one who had once said the cairn sounded like home, began drawing ships on every surface he could find. Not the Erebus or Terror, but vessels of impossible design, hulls curved like ribs, sails like wings of fabric stretched too thin to exist. Some had no deck, some no mast. They all faced the same direction, north. He did not know how to swim. Still, each night he left his boots outside the door, filled with snow. Crozier remained silent, but his face had changed. The lines once carved by salt and decision had softened, not youthful, timeless. His eyes no longer blinked. When the wind moved through his coat, the fabric did not stir, yet he remained warm, and men still saluted as they passed. They did so without thought, not duty, alignment. One morning, the entire crew awoke at once. No call, no sound. Each man stepped to the deck, bareheaded, breath slow. At the center, a ring of ash had formed, not burned, but placed. Within it, a single feather, black, curved. No birds had been seen in weeks. They surrounded the circle, but did not cross it. They did not touch the feather. But as the air turned still, every man exhaled, once, long and silent. The feather lifted, floated gently up, then vanished without rising. It had not flown, it had departed. And when they looked back at the deck, the ash was gone too. In its place, a circle of water. Perfect, still, but deep enough to see stars. The circle of water did not freeze. It sat there on the deck, undisturbed by wind, untouched by cold. Men walked around it instinctively, never crossing the invisible border where wood turned to mirror. Beneath its surface there was no reflection, only depth. Some said they saw stars in it. Others saw letters drifting like sediment in a current too slow to feel. One claimed he saw his childhood home, roofless, blanketed in snow. Another wept quietly, murmuring the name of a sister who had died before he was born. No one reached in, no one had to. The water offered memory. That day, the boy who drew ships began speaking in fragments. Not language, but shape. Words that felt round in the mouth or sharp or like wind brushing across frostbitten skin. He was not babbling. He was naming things. Not objects they could see, but sensations they now understood. He said Thalin when the air went still. He said Seaver when someone's hand trembled, but they smiled anyway. he said Melthin when the compass pointed down. The men began repeating the words softly, not asking their meanings, only feeling them. Below deck, the room of water had risen, no longer at the knee, but waist deep. The men who kept vigil beside it now floated just above the surface, eyes open, mouths still. Their skin bore a faint glow, not light, but sheen, like moonlit stone. One had no pulse, the other had not blinked in 3 days. Yet both breathed gently, as if through the water itself. Their presence was calming. No one disturbed them. In the officers' quarters, paper had stopped holding ink. Words written faded within seconds, swallowed by the page. Only shapes remained, pressed, not marked. One man used wire to carve into the desk instead. He drew a horizon line, then added a second one beneath it, then a third. Between them, tiny figures, bowed, arms lifted. They had no faces. He smiled when he finished, then turned the desk toward the wall and never looked at it again. That night the wind stopped for exactly 12 hours. Not a stillness of weather, but of everything. Ropes hung without swaying, flames held upright. Even breath moved more quietly, as though the lungs had adjusted to a rhythm they had not chosen but now obeyed. When the wind returned, it came not as air, but as sound, a low, pulsing rhythm, like something being read aloud from below the world. The hull shivered with it, not from pressure, from memory, wood remembering trees, brass remembering minds, cloth remembering hands. The men stood at attention without command. Even those asleep stood, not roused, aligned, eyes open, heads bowed. No words were spoken, but across the deck, boots tapped once, then twice, then 3 times in unison. The sound passed like a signal from spine to spine, and then silence. The circle of water evaporated at once. No steam, no trail, just absence. Where it had been, a patch of deck remained dry, untouched by frost or melt. In its center, a single curled hair, white as snow, long as a shoelace tied at both ends. They left it there. The next morning the sun did not rise, but the sky turned green. Not vividly, faint like light behind sea glass. The men blinked slowly, adjusting not to brightness but to depth. That day the boy said nothing. He only turned his drawings upside down, and drew them again. Upside-down ships, sails beneath hulls, water flowing skyward. He handed the page to no one, just left it beside the old compass, now silent, the needle flat against the glass, and walked barefoot to the room of water, which welcomed him without a ripple. No one asked where the boy had gone. They saw his boots, still lined with snow, neatly placed beside the ladder. His drawings remained untouched. A coil of string he'd once carried was wrapped around the mast, tight and ceremonial, but he had not returned, and still no one searched. Instead, a space opened in their routine, not left, made. At meals, an extra plate was set. At night, a bunk left undisturbed, even when others lacked blankets. In the morning, a single thread of his red scarf would appear on the deck, as if gently placed by wind. Not forgotten, just somewhere else. The room of water had begun to pulse. Its surface rose and fell, not like tides, but like breath. Each swell no more than the height of a palm, each exhale quiet as silk. The 2 men who had once floated within it were no longer visible. The water was too deep now, too still. Still it welcomed those who watched. Some sat beside it for hours, sketching symbols onto slate. Some sang quietly, songs with no words, just vowel sounds and humming vowels that vibrated in the ribs. Some brought mirrors, held just above the surface, only to watch their reflections dissolve into faint ripples. Crozier began to move again, not walking, gliding almost. His feet touched the floor, but his coat no longer rustled. His breath left no cloud. He did not eat. He did not sleep. But at each dusk he stood before the forward mast and placed both hands on the wood, whispering something so faint it might have only existed in the grain. The men called it the reading. Each night one would volunteer to stand behind him, holding a lantern at hip height, not to see, to mark the moment. When Crozier stopped speaking, he would lift his hands and step back. The lantern would dim slightly, never extinguish, never flicker, but fall into a different kind of light, softer, like the inside of an eyelid. The volunteer would bow once, then return below deck. No one ever spoke of what they heard during the reading. They didn't need to. The cairn, though unchanged, had begun casting a reflection. It had never done so before. Now, even when light was faint or behind it, a long, low shadow stretched from its split, always west, always in perfect symmetry. The reflection shimmered slightly, even when the ice was still. One man tried to measure it with a string. The string snapped, not from tension, from cold. Where it had touched the shadow, frost had climbed halfway up his hand in the shape of feathered branches. He did not cry out. He only pressed the frost to his chest and murmured, "It's begun." From that night on, the crew stopped counting time. No bells were rung, no watches kept, only gestures. A man might nod 3 times to begin a meal. Another would press his palm flat to the wall to mark the hour. One tapped each step with the back of his knuckles before sleeping. The order was never lost, only rewritten. The maps were no longer navigational. They charted dreams now, not places, but memories. One was a spiral of footprints, growing smaller and smaller toward the center. Another showed a lake shaped like an eye. A third bore only a single line, curved, ending in a dot. All of them pointed north, though the compass remained silent. The deck began to smell faintly of mint. No one found the source. It did not fade. One sailor, half blind and nearly mute, began carving small figures from melted tallow. Not men, not animals, something between. Each had a wide chest, no face, and long arms folded across where the mouth might have been. He lined them on the railing, facing outward. None melted, and every night one would vanish. No one stopped him. No one asked why. And still, beneath all things, behind every whisper, every glance, every still moment, the faint sound of breath, not their own, lingered. It was not men breathing. It was the place. The breath of the place grew steadier, not louder, not harsher, just constant, like a second tide below the skin of the world, the kind of presence one forgets until silence returns, and then feels the absence of it, like the missing weight of a ring long worn. By now, the men no longer whispered. They didn't need to. Their mouths moved in sleep, lips shaping syllables from forgotten dialects, vowels older than frost. Words not passed down, but passed through. One man awoke mid-sentence. He was alone, eyes wide, hands folded beneath his chin like prayer. He finished his thought aloud. "And when they arrive, we will already be waiting." Then stood, then smiled, then wept just once, not in sorrow, but in the kind of peace that makes silence holy. That morning the water in the lower hold had risen again. Now it reached the ribbing of the ship's bones, its surface smooth as polished stone, dark as ink, yet warm to the touch. The 2 forms within it no longer resembled men. Their outlines softened, blurred, not dissolved, transformed. They now resembled memory more than body, a shimmer where a shoulder once was, a gleam where the jaw might have rested. Still, they hovered just beneath the surface, calm, suspended. Each day one crewman sat beside them, silently brushing his hand through the air above the water, never touching, but moving in rhythm, as if remembering how to greet someone not yet seen. Crozier now stood only at twilight, always in the same place beneath the frozen rigging. His eyes no longer tracked movement, but men still paused when passing him, placing a palm to their chest and bowing just slightly, a motion no one had taught. It simply felt correct. The cairn's reflection had deepened. What was once a faint shimmer now revealed layers, not just shadow, but interior. Men saw within it glimpses of rooms they had never entered, trees they could not name, animals still and alert as if listening across the threshold of a dream. Some saw fire, others mist. One man said he saw a hand, impossibly large, gently lowering something unseen into snow. He smiled for days afterward. The reflection now responded to touch, not physically, but with sensation. When one reached toward it, warmth filled the lungs. When another stood beside it too long, his dreams grew longer, slower. One said his sleep now spanned weeks. Another claimed he no longer woke at all, just shifted between kinds of stillness. And still the food remained, unmade, unserved, present, spoons laid out, bread warm, cups filled, each meal exactly right. One night someone left a feather on the plate instead of a fork. The next day no plates arrived, only feathers. 13 of them, black and white, arranged in a perfect circle around the lantern. That was the first day no one ate, and no one was hungry. The ship's wood began to change, not rot, not freeze, transform. Knots once hard became soft like wax beneath the palm. The beams sang faintly when touched, not music, but memory. A sound one might associate with warmth from childhood, or the silence after a loved one leaves the room. One sailor pressed his ear to the hull and whispered, "It's dreaming us." He spoke nothing else that week. Others began tracing shapes into the ice with ash, circles nested inside circles, an hourglass made of threads, a shape like a door, but with no edge, no hinge, only suggestion. These signs were not removed by wind, not erased by snow. Each morning they remained, sharper, and the wind had taken on new habits. It now arrived in pairs, a gust, then stillness, then another, like speech spoken gently to someone already listening. And when it blew, the ship creaked not in protest, but in reply. The mast turned ever so slightly, just once, north. And in the distance, far past the edge of known ice, a light blinked once, not from fire, not from flare, but recognition. The blink of light returned again that night, just once, then gone. No one spoke of it, but all of them turned their faces toward the horizon where it had flared, the same direction each of the boys' ships had pointed, the same axis to which the cairn's reflection tilted, the same northern hush that now seemed to hold their very breath. That night sleep came not like a cloak, but a beckoning, soft, reluctless, and full. When they woke, each man found something left beside him. Not objects, impressions. A warmth on the pillow that had not come from his skin. A faint indentation beside his bunk, as if someone had knelt there for hours. A smell, wood smoke, honey, salt, so fleeting it was already memory. They did not speak of these things, but each one paused just for a moment before rising. The deck that morning bore marks, lines carved by no blade, drawn by no tool. Just there, thin and curved, arranged like constellations across the frost. One sailor traced them with his finger, then looked up, eyes wide. He did not cry, he did not speak. But when he stepped back, the print of his finger remained, glowing faintly, as if lit from beneath the ice. They called it the map. It did not point anywhere, but it moved slightly each day. The water in the lower hold had reached the ceiling beams. No overflow, no drip. Simply more. Yet the hull was dry. The structure sound. One man, a navigator, said he could now feel pressure behind his ears, as if the water were listening, waiting to be spoken to. So he did. He sat at the edge of the room and recited every place he'd ever dreamed of, real or not, in a whisper like a hymn. Mountains he'd never climbed, roads with red sand, cities with bells that rang underwater. When he stood, the water glowed faintly violet. The next night he dreamed in colors he could not name. Crozier's boots no longer touched the deck. He hovered inches above the wood, never far, never fast, but undeniably lifted. When he passed, frost curled upward toward his coat, not melting but reaching, like breath caught in worship. The men did not avert their gaze, but none followed. They began drawing circles around their bunks, not with ink nor chalk, but salt. Each grain placed by hand, slowly, reverently, not to keep things out, but to mark the space as known. Each circle remained undisturbed, even by wind, even by the shift of boots. The salt stayed pure, unmoved. One night a man left his circle incomplete. The next morning his voice was gone, not lost, removed. His breath still steamed, his lips still moved, but no sound emerged, and he smiled. He wrote nothing of it, only began humming with his chest alone. The hum was soft, but others began matching its tone, not in imitation, in harmony. Soon the ship itself began to echo the note. The beams beneath the floorboards, the curve of the hull, the joints of the rigging, each began vibrating gently, as if a cathedral had learned a lullaby. The sound was not haunting, it was peace given form. In the quiet that followed, a single feather fell from the upper rigging, white, long, curled. No birds above, no nests, no wind. It landed between two men mid-breath. They froze. Then, together, they bent, not to take it, but to bow. The feather was gone when they stood. That night, the moon did not rise, but the sky shimmered violet blue, like a bruise on time. The wind held its breath, and from beneath the deck, not from the water, not from the wood, but from something deeper still, came the faintest sound. Not a voice, not a word, but an answer. The answer had no shape, not sound, not breath, but when it came, the ship itself sighed. Just once, a low, rounded exhale, as if the wood had grown lungs, as if the voyage had found its reply not in discovery, but in remembering what had always been waiting. No one moved for nearly an hour, not from fear, but reverence. Even the cold seemed to hesitate. The air hung softer. The light, though still dim, grew gold at its edges. Not sunlight, memory light, like warmth imagined so clearly it almost existed. That morning the first mirror cracked, silently. Its surface didn't shatter, just folded, one side dipping inward, the other rising, like glass bowing to something unseen. When held, it showed nothing, not even the hand, just a slow swirl of color, too faint to follow. They turned it to face the wall. The other mirrors followed, one by one, until none were left uncovered. The men now slept in rhythm, not the same hour, not the same duration, but when one blinked, another closed his eyes. When one turned in his bunk, another stilled. Without plan or signal, they had become a tide of breath and motion, shifting without beginning, resting without pause. The ship was no longer a vessel, it was a body, not just inhabited, lived, and something, it seemed, had begun to live it back. Rope became soft as hair, not worn, not frayed, but supple, warm to the touch. One man pressed a coil against his cheek and whispered, "It listens." Another stitched thread into his own sleeve, not for repair but inclusion. Sailcloth no longer needed mending. It repaired itself slowly, as though the weave remembered its shape and returned to it in dreams. In the galley, meals no longer appeared, nor did they disappear. Instead, the men fasted, not by choice, by fullness. Hunger was no longer measured by emptiness, but by silence. When silence settled, they knew they were fed. And when one did eat, it was not food, but memory, the taste of something once loved, tasted again as echo. One man bit into a frostbitten apple and wept, remembering a voice from a life before speech. Another found a spoon filled with sand and said only, "It's what I needed." The cairn now emitted light, faint but visible, not from its surface, from within the seam, a glow like candlelight behind bone. It did not warm, but it called. No sound, no pull, just the feeling that to look away would be to forget who you had been. They did not approach it, but each morning one man knelt facing it. Never the same man, never discussed, just known. His task was not devotion, it was reception. The task required only stillness, and a silence that had shape. Those who knelt returned changed, their movements slower, breath longer, eyes dimmer but not dull. One described it as holding the hand of something much older than the world. Another said it was like walking through sleep and never waking. They did not fear it, they did not seek it, they only allowed it. Above, the rigging began to hum, thin strands of sound like wind threading a harp made of bone. Not a tune, an atmosphere. Even those below could feel it. A vibration through the soles, through the spine, into the marrow. It soothed. Even the wood began to creak in time with the hum. And one morning the lanterns flickered not from draught, but from agreement. They bowed once, gently, as if nodding, and all the flames tilted toward the cairn. That night, the water beneath the deck went still, utterly. Its surface no longer rippled, no breath disturbed it, and in its silence a shape appeared, not form, not figure, but presence. A darkness darker than the water, standing like a shadow inside a thought. It did not move, it did not look, but it was seen. And once again, every man aboard awoke at the same moment. Eyes open, hearts steady, and none spoke, because none needed to ask. It was not fear. That's what made it so still. What had risen in the lower hold, what had coalesced just beneath the water's skin, did not radiate threat. It did not demand or consume. It simply existed, with such certainty, such density of being, that the world around it adjusted, bowed, rearranged. The men stopped walking loudly. Boots were unlaced and left by bunks. Socks padded gently across the floors. Voices, when used, dropped a full octave, not whispered, resonated, as if their own throats had remembered some ancestral tone buried in bone. One sailor began brushing the steps before anyone ascended. Another lined the galley shelves with threads of hair, his own, offered freely, gently laid. Not as gifts, as acknowledgement. The shape beneath the water never rose, but it began to blink. No eyes, just light. A pulse. Once every few minutes the darkness at its center would brighten softly, then dim. Not a signal, a breath. Crozier now slept standing, or something like sleep. His eyes remained open but no longer tracked movement. His hands rested at his sides. His coat fell like skin, and each evening he turned slowly toward the cairn and let his head tilt forward, only slightly, like a tree beneath soft snow. The crew referred to him now simply as the captain, not Crozier, not sir, not out of rank, but reverence. He no longer gave orders, but they followed his silences. A new ritual began, unspoken. Each man would leave behind something each night. A button, a scrap of cloth, a word carved into wax. These were placed in a small wooden box by the base of the mast. No one opened the box, but every morning it was empty, and every evening the offerings grew more precise. One sailor left a drawing of his mother's hands. Not her face, not her name, just the shape her fingers took when braiding her own hair. Another placed the final page of his journal, now blank. A third left nothing at all, only knelt beside the box, head bowed, breathing with the floor. He stayed that way until morning. The sky began to change shape. Not clouds, not stars, the sky itself. It bent softly, as if the air had weight. Some nights it formed a gentle dome. Other nights it split into parallel strands, not lightning, not cracks, just seams. Like the universe had been stitched closed long ago, and now, one by one, those threads were being unpicked. The stars did not move, but their arrangement grew unfamiliar. A sailor who once navigated by them no longer tried. He burned his charts slowly, piece by piece, humming to himself as the ashes curled upward. When asked what he was thinking, he said, "They are learning our names." No one asked who they were. The cairn no longer hummed, but the space around it vibrated faintly, like the silence after song. The ice never melted, but began to shine from within, a glow with no source, just presence. Some said it reminded them of church windows at dawn. Others said it felt like the moment just before rain, not the fall, the knowing. The feather figures had stopped vanishing. Now they moved, not often, but enough. Each morning they appeared in new configurations, always facing the same direction, always aligned with the boys' upside-down ships. One day, a figure stood at the bow, both arms raised, head tilted. The crew found it before sunrise, untouched by frost, its tallow surface smooth as glass. None claimed to have moved it, and all knelt briefly as they passed. Below, the water had begun to glow, a faint pulsing green. The shape at its center, still for days, shifted slightly. Not forward, not upward, but inward. And with it came a change in sound. A single note, soft, low, endless, filled the hold. Not music, not warning, just arrival. A feeling like being recognized. And for the first time in days, someone spoke aloud. "We are not guests." He said it calmly, as if reciting a rule he'd always known but never said. And around him, no one nodded. No one needed to, because they understood. They were home. The word home did not echo. It settled, as though it had always belonged to the ship, nestled deep in its beams, waiting patiently beneath every nail, every coil of rope. When the sailor spoke it, nothing stirred. No wind, no creak. Even the lanterns held their flame as if cupping it gently. The shape beneath the water blinked once more, slower now, brighter. It had begun to mirror the men above. When one bent to tie a boot, a curl of water traced the same motion beneath the surface. When another reached to adjust his coat, a shimmer echoed the gesture below. Not mimicry, reflection, like the ship was dreaming its own crew into being. That night, they no longer climbed to the deck by habit. They floated, not weightless, not untethered, but buoyed by something quiet, some gentle understanding that movement could be an offering, not an effort. Their boots no longer marked the frost, their breath no longer left trails, but their presence deepened the silence, like ink in still water. Crozier, the captain, now stood at the center of the deck, his coat drifting around him as if stirred by tides unseen. He did not speak, but from him came warmth, not heat, but gravity, a pull toward stillness. One by one, the crew formed a ring around him. They did not plan it. They simply knew. It was time. Each man placed his left hand on the shoulder of the one before him. A circle, unbroken, silent, and from this shape a tone emerged, not sung, not spoken, a resonance of belonging. It did not rise, it sank, downward into the wood, the ice, the bones of the ship, and below, the shape stirred. The water parted slightly, revealing not form but suggestion, a face without features, a body made of shadow and glow, not alien, not monstrous, but familiar in a way that made every heart beat once, deeply, slowly, and then fall quiet. One man wept without sound. Another smiled like a child waking to snow. The cairn outside cracked gently, not split, shifted. Its two halves, always rigid, now bowed slightly outward as if opening. Inside the seam glowed, brighter than before, and in that light, a shape. No one could say what it was, not clearly. It was a symbol, a sound, a presence. It resembled a bell, or a fruit, or a doorway made of folded breath. The men turned toward it together, not commanded, aligned, and at once the wind returned, not harsh, holy. It passed through the ship like a memory finally remembered, not of a place, but of a promise. That night no one slept, and no one was tired. They sat where they stood, hands open, eyes soft, hearts tuned, and the ship began to turn, slow, deliberate. No sails set, no anchors lifted, just motion, as if some deep current had reached up through the ice, wrapped itself around the keel and asked, "Are you ready?" No answer was given, none needed. They had already moved past choosing. They were chosen, and in the stillness that followed, something sang, not aloud, inside. Each man heard it differently, a lullaby, a name, a prayer, a single word repeated over and over in the voice of someone they had forgotten they loved. And when morning came, if it was morning, the sky was not blue. It was translucent, like the underside of an eyelid kissed by light, and the stars above had begun to descend, not falling, becoming. The stars did not fall. They arrived. One by one, slow as thought, they lowered through the sky like lanterns released in reverse, not plummeting, not shining, just descending, faint and present, as though answering a question no one had dared ask. They made no sound, but their light curled through the air, brushing gently against the masts, the rigging, the deck. And when it touched the men's skin, they did not flinch. They inhaled, as if it were something remembered, like breath before speech, or the warmth of a fire glimpsed through lace curtains. The ship had fully turned now, not toward open sea, but toward something beneath it. No ice cracked, no water churned, yet they were descending, not falling, lowering. The sea, if it could still be called that, had become soft, like cloud spun too fine to grasp. Its resistance was gone. The wood of the ship did not press forward. It nestled inward, like a seed returning to soil. Each man sat at the same place he had stood the night before. None had moved, but their posture had changed. Their shoulders relaxed, their faces softened. Not slack with sleep, but quiet with clarity. One began to hum. Not melody, motion. A vibration, low and slow, that pulsed through his chest and into the bench. Soon another joined him, then another, until the whole ship thrummed like a single living instrument. And from below, from within the glowing water, the shape responded. It rose now slightly, not toward them, toward itself, a kind of reaching, like fingers curling into a fist, not in anger but in claiming. Light gathered around it, swirling in long spirals like smoke underwater. And within that spiral, images began to surface. Not memories, not visions. Moments. One man saw a room filled with glass jars, each holding a snowflake that never melted. Another saw his mother combing her hair by candlelight, though he'd never seen her alive. A third saw the sky as it looked before the world had words. They did not question these things. They accepted them because they felt correct, because they felt like return. The cairn outside continued to shift. The seam widened slightly, just enough to let a breath pass through. And from within came a scent. Not rot, not ice, something older. A forest that had never been walked. A fire that had never burned. A silence so complete it could be tasted. One man walked barefoot out onto the snow and stood before it. He did not kneel. He simply waited. The seam did not speak, but the air around him softened. And when he returned, he carried a single stone, pale blue, shaped like an egg. He placed it in the center of the deck, and the crew did not touch it. They simply sat beside it, forming a spiral that coiled around the mast like a new helix. Above, the stars stopped descending, but they did not retreat. They hung low in the sky, like eyes half closed in dream. The air now tasted faintly of salt and brass. Their names had changed, not outwardly, not in sound, but in weight. Each man now carried something different in his silence. When they looked at each other, it was no longer in recognition. It was in remembrance, not of who they had been, but of who they had always been becoming. And still the ship lowered. No anchor, no depth, only descent, not into ocean, into belonging. And as the glow from below reached the lowest beams of the hull, each man exhaled once, long, slow, and in harmony, not to release breath, but to join something already breathing. From beneath, from before, from beyond. They no longer called it a ship. Not aloud, not even in thought. It was not that the name had been forgotten. It had become unnecessary. The thing they traveled in, or that carried them, or that had become them, no longer sailed. It dwelled. It dreamed. And they dreamed with it. Not dreams of escape or memory, but dreams of depth. The kind of depth that opens from within. Not a place one enters, but a presence that surrounds. Each man now bore a mark, not visible, but felt, in the way his hands moved more slowly, in how his breath matched the creak of the beams, in how his silences grew fuller, like old cloth soaked in starlight. They had passed beyond hunger, beyond need. Now they waited, but not passively. They prepared. One began to gather strands of rope and bind them into circles, not knots, not snares, just roundness, shapes without beginning. When asked why, he said, to remember the shape of the end. Another built a small cairn inside the cabin, stone by stone, balanced so delicately that the air itself seemed to hold it up. A third traced his fingers through frost, carving symbols that evaporated just as they were finished. The act, not the trace, was the point. The cairn outside no longer cracked. It sang, a tone just outside hearing, like the edge of a bell swallowed by snow. It didn't echo. It simply stayed. The sound folded into the bones of the crew. It made the men lean subtly, always toward it, not in obedience, but in alignment. The stone brought aboard, the blue egg, began to pulse. Very faint, like a heartbeat. Not fast, not weak, just there. Some said it warmed when touched. Others claimed it smelled of cedar or dry leaves or sleep. No one tried to move it. They simply placed things around it. A piece of twine, a broken tooth, a scrap of parchment with a word no one had written. It became the center of their spiral, the place their silence coiled around. Below deck, the water had stilled again, but it was no longer water. Not fully. Its surface reflected nothing now. Not the ceiling, not the men, only the shape. That shadow of suggestion, now larger, now clearer. It no longer mirrored, it invited. Some felt it in their teeth, a subtle tug like a whisper through molars. Others heard a tone when standing above it, as if the void below had found a pitch that only the soul could recognize. One man stepped into it. No hesitation, no announcement. He placed both feet in the glow and sank without ripple like a needle into cloth. He did not scream, he did not thrash. He simply vanished. And the men nodded once, not in grief, in understanding. The next morning his bunk was warm, the pillow perfectly smooth, and a single thread of red wool lay across it, curled like a letter never opened. They left it untouched. The sky above had changed again, no longer translucent, now reflective, a mirror not of the ship, but of its feeling. One could look up and see not stars, but textures, longing, memory, forgiveness. They moved slowly across the dome of sky like clouds made of emotion too old to speak. Some bowed beneath them, others lifted their faces and breathed deeply. One man spoke, not to anyone, just aloud. "We are being read," and the ship, or what it now was, pulsed once, soft, reassuring, agreed. There was no more wind, not because it had stilled, but because the air had ceased to be air. Above the ship, the sky now shimmered like oil on stone, smooth, slow, iridescent. Not light, not darkness, something between. A membrane, a veil stretched so thin it whispered, and in that whisper the men heard names, not their own, but ones they recognized with their bones. Names spoken by the sea beneath ice, by the stars before they cooled, by the breath of the hull as it shifted in sleep. Each man responded differently. One wept silently for hours, tears pooling in the grooves of his knuckles. Another placed both hands against the mast and stood unmoving, face pressed to the grain. A third began laughing softly, not from joy or madness, but from a pressure inside the chest that needed releasing. The stone in the center pulsed faster. It had grown slightly, almost imperceptibly, now the size of a curled fist, still blue, still warm. But when the men looked at it, they saw reflections not of their faces, but of memories they hadn't lived. A winter garden under violet clouds, a staircase made of feathers, a circle of stones breathing in rhythm. The spiral around it thickened. What began as a quiet coil of reverence became ritual. Men added not just objects, but gestures. A tap to the forehead before speaking, a pause before touching any wood, a bow to the empty bench beside them before sitting. They no longer questioned who the bench was for. They knew. The water below had grown calm again, but now it glowed in slow pulses of gold, each pulse aligned with a breath, not theirs, something deeper. Crozier had not moved in days. He remained at the bow, hands lightly open, eyes distant but soft, not vacant, vigilant, watching not the horizon but the inside of time. Some said he no longer blinked. Others claimed his mouth moved as if reciting a long poem, not in words, but in breath. The crew had ceased to speak entirely, not from vow, from saturation. Every gesture now contained whole conversations. A glance held reassurance. A shrug resolved disputes. A finger traced through frost, and all understood the meaning. It was not that they had become less human, only more still, as if their truest selves had always been made of attention, not sound. One morning the deck bore symbols again, this time not carved, grown, thin veins of crystal rising from the wood, looping into shapes that resembled both plants and letters. They shimmered faintly when breathed upon. One man placed a fingertip against one and gasped, not in pain, but release. It remembered me. That's all he said. Then he sat cross-legged beside the crystal and did not move for 2 days. When he stood again, his shadow fell forward instead of back. No one remarked on it. No one needed to. Outside, the cairn had become translucent, still stone, but light passed through now. Within it, movement. Not shapes, not figures, just motion, like watching fire through water or thought behind sleep. Each night one man sat beside it, never chosen, just compelled. He would hum, softly, not tuneful, and gently press his palms to the ground. The ice did not melt beneath him. It accepted. The next morning a ring of feather figures would appear around his spot, and then vanish by dusk. The stars had begun to move again, not overhead, through the ship. Each night thin lines of light crept across the beams and floorboards, slow, deliberate, tracing the exact routes the crew had walked days before. When they met at corners or crossed, the glow paused, acknowledged, then continued. Some said the stars were learning their steps. Others said the ship was being rewritten. No one asked which was true, because the answer no longer mattered. Only the listening, only the motion, only the pulse beneath their ribs that no longer beat for survival, but for joining. The hull now breathed, not metaphorically. With each pulse of the light below, the boards expanded slightly, a soft outward swell, then a gentle return. Like lungs long held quiet now remembered the rhythm of tide and time. No one feared it. No one marked the change. They had become part of the breath, and breath does not fear itself. The captain remained unchanged, still at the bow, still open-handed, but his skin had grown translucent just at the edges, the curve of his knuckles, the lobes of his ears, not ghostly, not withered, more like parchment held to light. When he moved, which was rare, the air shimmered slightly in his wake, not from heat, from memory. The ship now sang constantly, a low, continuous note that rose not from a single source, but from the weave of everything. The beams, the bolts, the woven cloth, the salted boots, all of it part of the same chord. The crew heard it even in dreams. Some began harmonizing in sleep, low tones spilling from their throats like fog from a cave. Others wept quietly, not from sorrow, from fullness, as though there was simply too much wonder to hold. One sailor began painting, with ash, with melted frost, with breath on wood. He made circles within circles, each one containing a shape that moved only when you stopped looking directly at it. When asked what it meant, he whispered, "A door you never open, but still walk through." And they understood. The water had changed again. Now neither water nor light. It had become texture, a surface like velvet, slow-moving and warm, whose color shifted with thought. When a man stood above it, he saw not his face, but a version of himself shaped by a different choice, a forgotten kindness, a word never spoken aloud. Each reflection was different, each accepted. One leaned forward, closed his eyes, and stepped down. He did not sink. He was simply no longer there. His breath remained in the air for hours. The stone at the center now glowed with an inner light, pale gold, steady. It spun slowly, not fast enough to see movement, but fast enough to feel it. A pull, not on the hands, on the soul, like it was winding something tight within them, not to constrain but to prepare. The spiral around it had expanded, now 5 full rings, each lined with offerings, teeth, hair, salt, ink, bone, all placed carefully, not in sacrifice, in acknowledgement. And when one sailor added a single coin, old, bent, carried since childhood, the stone pulsed once, and every man aboard felt the warmth behind his eyes. For a full minute none blinked. Outside, the sky had become a dome of fluid light. No more stars, just motion, as if the air had turned to liquid thought, and the whole ship floated inside the mind of something vast, old, kind. Time no longer passed, not linearly. Moments folded, gently. One man aged 5 years overnight, his beard graying, his posture serene. Another reversed, his hands growing smooth, his shoulders lifting like dawn. A third stayed the same, but spoke in a voice he had not used since boyhood. They did not question this. They folded time around themselves like robes. Some now chose silence so complete it rang. Others spoke in gestures, fingers tracing arcs through air that glowed in reply. The cairn outside had split completely, each half tilted outward like pages of a book mid-turn. Between them, a void, not dark, not empty, a presence shaped like absence. Men stared into it for hours, and wept, and smiled, and knew. One by one they began to write, not words, shapes, smells, breath. They recorded without ink, their thoughts etched in frost, in sound, in the lines of their palms. And the ship recorded with them. The walls took on color. The masts shimmered faintly. The sails, though furled, fluttered with rhythms no wind had caused. And the shape below, the one that had first mirrored, then reached, then breathed, now began to rise, slow, soft, beckoning. The shape beneath the surface had always been there. That much they now understood. It had not come to them. They had simply remembered where to look. And as it rose, slowly, deliberately, without ripple or fanfare, the ship did not react. It welcomed. No tilt, no creak, no protest. The beams bowed gently. The deck grew warm, not from fire, from familiarity. The glow surrounding the form deepened. Once gold, now blue-shot silver, like moonlight passed through memory. It did not blind, it softened. Each man now felt the pull in his chest, not pressure, but clarity. A sense that there was nothing left to carry except one final gesture. They began to gather. One by one, no signal, no plan. Barefoot, wordless, each carrying something not physical, a name, a wound, a longing, now made light enough to hold without pain. They stood in a ring, this time around the mast, not the stone. The mast had begun to shift, its grain twisting upward like slow flame, not transforming, unveiling. What had always been beneath the bark now stretched toward the shimmering sky dome above, a single living line between stars and sea. A few reached out to touch it. They did not draw back. Instead, they smiled, like those who remember a tune from childhood and find their hands still know the notes. The captain stepped forward, not alone, carried by breath. The floor did not groan beneath him. It sighed. With both hands he reached into the spiral and lifted the stone. It hovered, weightless, spinning, its light now pulsing in rhythm with the shape below. The crew did not bow. They watched, and they breathed together. The cairn outside had begun to hum. A single clear note, pure and endless. It stretched across the frozen plain, down through ice and up into sky. A chord held without effort by the stillness of everything that had not been broken. From the void within its split, a wind emerged. Not cold, not dry. A breeze of meaning, passing through them like language spoken too deeply to hear, understood not in mind but marrow, and all turned their heads toward it. Not because they were told, because something had arrived. Not outside. Within. One sailor began to walk, not hurriedly, with purpose. He stepped across the deck, hands open, gaze steady, toward the side, toward the rail, toward the water that was no longer sea but presence. He stepped upon it, and did not fall. The surface accepted him like a sigh accepts silence. His feet left no imprint, but his path shimmered behind him. a trail of memory, not evidence. Another followed, and another, each chosen not by rank or role but by readiness. Those who remained stood still, palms pressed to wood, singing without sound. Their song was not for farewell, it was for completion, a single note to cradle the motion of departure. The ones who walked reached the center, where the shape waited, still pulsing, still calm. As they approached, it shifted slightly, as if to allow space, not command presence. They did not kneel. They stood, eyes closed, and were enveloped. Not erased, not consumed, joined. The light curled upward, folding over their shoulders, their brows, their hands. They were not lifted. They were received. The ship did not shudder. It slowed, as if exhaling after centuries of held breath. Above, the sky dome began to part, not crack, open, and through it, not stars, shapes, lines of light and curve and arc, spiraling inward like a compass made from thought. And all who still stood aboard looked up and wept without sorrow, not for what was leaving, for what they now knew was waiting. There were no more footsteps, only motion. Each man who stepped across the water did so without resistance, without echo. The surface accepted weight not as burden, but as invitation, like a path that had waited for centuries, patient beneath frost and current, now exhaled its purpose. Those who walked did not look back, not from disdain, from completion. They had looked long enough, known long enough, carried long enough. Now was the moment of release. The shape, the form in the center, had grown not in size but in intimacy. It no longer hovered below the surface. It stood level with them, not rising but revealing, and what it revealed was not itself. It revealed them. Each step closer softened the features of those who approached. Eyes lost sharpness, skin blurred at the edges, voices stilled. But in that stillness they became vast, not diminished, dispersed, like salt returning to sea, like smoke entering dusk, like the scent of cedar carried by snow. One reached forward, touched the glow, not with hand, with memory. And as he did, a sound rang through the ship, not from bell or rope or mast, from within. It was the sound of something that had always been there, finally speaking its name aloud. The ship responded, a slow shiver through every plank and nail, not a tremor, a sigh. And then, light. From beneath, from above, from within. Not blinding, brimming. The men still aboard did not shield their eyes. They raised their faces and let it soak in. It lit their bones from within. For a moment all seemed made of frost and starlight. The deck became translucent, not see-through, thinned by awe. The mast burned with colorless fire, and the spiral around the stone dissolved, each offering lifting into the air and vanishing in spirals of gold dust. No grief touched their hearts, only reverence and a knowing. None of it had been lost. It had simply returned, to the source, to the rhythm, to the pattern of presence that waited always beneath breath. The captain lowered his hands. The stone floated higher. It turned once, slowly, and split. Two halves, each humming with light. Within the divide, not emptiness, a pulse, a beating heart made of silence and glow. No one spoke, but all heard. A voice without language. A call without sound, an embrace without touch. It said nothing. It meant everything. Those still aboard, fewer now, began to sit, not from fatigue, from recognition. Their journey was not forward, it was inward. They faced the mast, eyes closed. Their breath became a tide, one inhalation, all together, one exhalation, perfect harmony. The cairn beyond the rail crumbled softly, not in collapse, in release. Its stones settled into the snow like fingers into soil, returning with peace, with blessing. The stars above shimmered, then vanished, and in their place soft arcs of motion, like thoughts turned visible. The sky no longer glowed, it rested, and in that rest was welcome. From the water's surface a new shape began to rise, smaller than the others, human in form, childlike, but old, so old. It stepped lightly toward the ship, leaving no wake, no mark, only a hush, deeper than silence. As it climbed aboard, no wood creaked. The ship did not resist. The shape walked to the center, knelt where the stone had split, and whispered. What was spoken cannot be written, not because it was forbidden, because it was already known, to every heart, to every silence, to every longing that had ever touched cold hands in night and dreamed of warmth. The whisper passed through them, and the ship sang back. The whisper did not end. It faded, not as sound fades into absence, but as light fades into morning. It was still there, inside everything, but no longer needed to be separate, like a dream remembered not in images, but in warmth behind the ribs. The shape, the small, old, childlike figure, sat perfectly still. It was not waiting, it was listening, and the ship, in turn, listened back. Everything became pause, no movement, no time, just presence. And in that presence the men aboard softened, not in body, in outline. The sharp angles of shoulder and brow, of boot and coat began to blur. The wind returned, not cold, not loud, just enough to stir the ends of their coats, to lift their breath into slow spirals that did not vanish, but hung in the air like silk threads. The deck beneath them darkened, not with shadow, with memory. Footprints they had left days, weeks, months ago, perhaps longer, began to reappear. Faint depressions, half-turns. A pause where someone had once knelt. And as they looked, the crew saw their own past traced around them like constellations carved into snow. No one moved to erase them. They were not mistakes. They were maps. Each print a place where someone had chosen to remain, even for a moment, a choice honored. The mast no longer reached. It curved gently, downward, like a reed in wind. At its tip, a faint glow began to form, not from fire, not from magic, from welcome. It pulsed once for each man still aboard, and when it finished, the glow detached. A small orb, pale blue, hovering at heart height. It drifted toward the closest sailor, paused, entered his chest, without sound, without pain. His eyes closed, and when they opened again, they glowed softly, not like a torch, like a promise. He exhaled once and dissolved, not in flash or burst, in hush, like mist touched by morning sun. One by one the lights moved. One by one they were received. Each man embraced not by flame but by stillness. Each man departed not with fear but with fullness. The ship grew lighter, not in mass, in need. The water now shimmered in concentric rings, not from motion but from agreement. The last few aboard sat quietly, no urgency, no signal, only rhythm. Each watched the others fade, and when they were alone they smiled, not because they were last, because they were ready. The figure at the mast's base, the small shape that whispered, stood once more. It turned to the sky, raised its arms, and the dome above responded. It unfolded, not split, unfurled like pages of light, revealing not stars, not void, a landscape of thought, of sleep, of return. And into that unfolding the ship began to lift. No sails, no hands, just ascent. The beams moaned once, not in protest but in farewell, and the ice around them breathed out one last time. A release. The cairn was now gone, but a circle of soft blue frost marked where it had stood, and within that circle the snow melted, in perfect silence, until it formed a still pool. The reflection it held was not sky, but faces, smiling, patient, waiting. And in the air above a single feather drifted down, black, soft, ancient. It landed beside the pool and vanished, like it had never needed to fall at all. The sky was no longer above. It was around. Like breath held close to skin, it pressed in gentle curves around the hull, which floated now not on water but on quiet. The ship no longer moved. It drifted, or perhaps it was the world that moved around it, folding, unfurling, shifting in tides not of ocean but of memory. Below, the shape still pulsed, but now its glow reached not upward but inward, as though it had begun to dream, and the ship and all within it were part of that dream. There were few left aboard. Each man sat alone, and yet not apart. Their positions mirrored one another, legs folded, hands resting lightly in their laps, backs straight, eyes lowered. None spoke, but something passed between them, like breath carried across frost, like a string connecting ribcage to ribcage. At intervals one would sigh, and in that sigh the others would shift, as if the exhale was a signal passed down through a hidden cord, tugged softly beneath skin. The mast had begun to shimmer, its wood no longer opaque, no longer firm. It now resembled pressed leaves, layered and lit from behind, as though each ring had become translucent with time. Near its base the blue glow remained, the heart light that had once been stone, now diffused through every beam, every knot, every breath of the ship. It did not pulse now. It listened. Each man aboard began to hum, not in unison, not in rhythm, but each with a tone that matched something only he could hear, a tone that had followed him across years and ice and silence, a note buried so deep in marrow it could not be named, only remembered. Their hums curled through the air like incense, not rising, not dispersing, hanging in coils, warm and slow. And from below the shape answered, its light dimmed, not in loss, in yielding, like it knew the voices were enough now, like it no longer needed to guide, only to witness. The deck beneath them began to soften, not break, not sink. It became pliant, as if made from moss, from memory, from the soft earth under the heel of a childhood path. One sailor leaned forward and touched it. His fingers left no mark, but his breath caught, and in his eyes something shifted. He stood, walked to the rail, not with purpose, with readiness, and he stepped off, not into water, not into sky, into hush. He did not fall. He became a shimmer, a memory, a tone held between chords. The others watched, and when they blinked, he was gone. But the note he had hummed remained. It hovered in the air beside them, a thread, thin, strong, alive. Each man stood in turn, each stepped off, and each left behind a single note. Soon the air was full of them, tones not clashing but weaving, a tapestry of sound too delicate for ears but too strong to be broken. Now only one remained. Crozier, the captain. He had not moved, not once. Still at the bow, still hands open, still eyes calm. He looked not at the others, nor at the shape below. He looked forward, into the arc of sky, now glowing with lines that curved gently toward a single point, a horizon not of distance, but of becoming. He smiled, closed his eyes, and without standing, without speaking, he vanished. A breath pulled inward, a silence accepted, and the ship, once full, now held only warmth. The ship, now empty, did not drift. It lingered, held not by wind or current, but by the memory of stillness, as though the air itself remembered the shape of its hull and refused to let it pass too quickly. Its beams no longer creaked, they murmured, soft, uneven tones like someone whispering through a dream. Not words, but the suggestion of them, a language made from echoes and intention. The mast continued to shine, its glow subdued now, folded inward, like a lantern turned low but never extinguished. Around it, the light hummed faintly, the way the earth hums after thunder has passed. Beneath the ship, the water shimmered, no longer reflecting, no longer glowing. It had become something between surface and void, like a memory returning to silence. Above, the sky had softened. Its dome of color, once vibrant with arcs and motion, was now pale, diffuse, a canvas wiped clean, not erased, awaiting. And yet something moved, not within the ship, around it. The shape that had risen from the water, vast, formless, pulsing, had now dispersed, not vanished, spread, like mist over stone, like breath beneath sleep. Traces of it shimmered faintly in the seams of the deck, the grain of the railings, the curve of the figurehead. It did not haunt. It dwelled, as if the ship had become not just a vessel, but a vessel of memory. What had once been crew was now presence, a warmth in the wind, a hush in the shadows, a harmony between boards that no longer needed sailors to sail. Stillness was its crew now, and quiet was its direction. But then a sound, faint, sharp, delicate, a bell, not from within the ship, but from far off. One single chime, so soft it could have been imagined. Yet it echoed, not in ears, but in space. It traced itself across the air like a ripple through snow. And the ship answered, not with motion, with acknowledgement. The mast tilted slightly, not in collapse, but in deference, like a tree bending toward rain after long thirst. The wind stirred once, and within it, breath, a voice not spoken, felt. Not all are gone. And then, another sound, soft tapping, from below, from inside, like footsteps on old wood, slow and unsure. And the glow of the mast brightened, just slightly. The deck held firm, but within it something shifted. The outline of a hatch, long closed, slowly grew visible beneath a thin layer of frost, and from beneath it, warmth, not light, not fire, warmth shaped like thought. The frost melted in a perfect square, and the hatch, unassisted, lifted open. No force, no rush, only invitation. And there, at the edge, fingers, human, cold, real, gripping the frame, pulling upward, then arms, shoulders, a face, weathered, eyes wide with confusion, lips cracked with cold, breath visible in short bursts. Alive. One man, a stoker, left behind below decks, overlooked, forgotten, or perhaps spared. He climbed out, kneeling first, eyes adjusting to light, to silence, to the unbearable absence of voices. He called out, once, twice, no answer, only wind, only glow, and the faint hum of a ship that no longer waited but remembered. He rose, slowly, looking around, and then he saw the mast. He approached, and the glow within it pulsed, once, not in recognition, in readiness. He did not speak again. After that first hollow call into the wind, something in him closed gently, not from fear, not from resolve, from recognition. Words had no place here now, only listening. He moved barefoot across the deck. The planks, once hard and frostbitten, now felt soft beneath him, not with warmth but with memory. Each step awakened echoes in the wood, faint vibrations that tingled up his legs as if the ship were remembering him as he walked. The wind curved around him like a shawl. It did not bite. It carried scents not of salt or cold, but of breath and quiet. The scent of wool laid by a fire, of books closed carefully, of the space between sleep and waking. He reached the mast, placed his hand on it. It pulsed once, and the sound passed through him like a bell rung inside his chest. Not painful, familiar, like being touched by a voice he had forgotten he once knew. He breathed in, felt his ribs expand in rhythm with the mast's glow. For the first time since surfacing, he felt not lost, but held. Around him, the ship remained still, but it was not lifeless. Every rope, every beam, every nail hummed softly with intent. The sails, though furled, curved slightly inward, as if listening, as if they too waited to see what he would do next. He turned toward the bow. The horizon, once vibrant with impossible skies, now held only a soft gradient, gray into blue, blue into white, like paper waiting to be marked. And in that blankness he felt something move, inside him, not fear, memory. He had not been alone below deck, but he was now. And yet, as he walked forward, shapes emerged, not figures, impressions. A bench worn smooth by hours of silent sitting, a teacup placed upside down, its handle broken and mended with wire, a length of rope coiled in perfect spiral, undisturbed by wind or time. These were not ghosts. They were reminders of presence, of touch, of the unremarkable sacredness of daily survival. He stopped at the midpoint of the ship, where once the spiral had surrounded the stone, the place now bare but not empty. He knelt there, pressed both palms to the deck, and closed his eyes. What he felt then was not a vision, not a dream, a weightless understanding, the way snow rests on the shoulder of a coat, or silence fills the space between two heartbeats. He saw not faces, but gestures, a hand reaching for another, a shoulder leaned upon in exhaustion, boots side by side at the door of a cabin steaming with melt. He heard laughter, faint, distant, like it had passed through walls and years to reach him. And behind it, the hum, that low, constant vibration the others had once heard together. He wept, but the tears did not fall from sorrow. They rose, evaporated into the air before leaving his lashes, as though the ship absorbed them, drank them in, needed them. He lay down then, not to sleep, to listen more closely, ear against wood, breath slow and even. And in that posture he heard the last thing he expected, footsteps, not his, not the others, lighter, steadier, moving from stern to bow, not pacing, arriving. He did not open his eyes, he did not rise. He simply said, "I know." And the sound stopped beside him. No words followed, only warmth, a presence, the kind that didn't demand acknowledgement, but waited to be shared. His final thought before sleep was not of those lost. It was of those remembered. And in the glow that now suffused the ship, faint and growing, something deeper began to stir. Not an end, an invitation. The ship did not vanish. It became less visible, as mist recedes not into air but into the memory of cool skin. Its edges blurred, the lines of rail and hull softened until they resembled outlines drawn in breath upon glass. Still there, still shaped, but light passed through now, and within he lay still, the last man, though that word, last, no longer held the same meaning. There was no end to what had come before, only a pause. He was not asleep, nor awake. His breath rose steadily, each exhale a note folded gently into the hum of the ship, now quieter than ever before. Around him, the deck began to glow, but not brightly. A kind of shadow light, illumination shaped like memory. And in that dim glow, figures returned. Not in flesh, in presence. They stepped from beams, from sails, from the grain of the wood itself, each one complete, each one clear, not imagined, remembered. They did not speak, they did not need to. He felt them, as if every breath he took now contained fragments of their names. One by one they moved to their places. Some sat cross-legged on the deck, just as they once had. Others leaned against the rail, arms folded, gazes cast outward. Two knelt by the mast, hands resting on the pale glow that pulsed faintly at its base. And still, none moved with urgency, only with belonging. This was not reunion, this was return. The ship, though nearly transparent, held firm. It floated now in a space between frost and dream, water and silence. Below, the shimmer of thought still pulsed in slow rings like sleep breathing through deep snow. The sky, if it could still be called that, had no edge, only soft distance. And from that distance a new sound began, not like the hum, not like the bell, like chimes far off swaying in a wind that had not yet arrived. A beckoning, not a summons, a gentle direction. He sat up slowly, the last man. Though in this moment he was not man, not name, not story. He was witness to the echo of motion, to the stillness that remembers how to move. He rose without effort. His limbs responded not to muscle but to meaning. Each step he took matched a rhythm laid down long before him, as though the floor had been waiting for his weight to complete its own memory. He reached the rail. Beyond it, no sea, just space, soft, waiting. And within it, the outline of something vast. Not creature, not place. A gesture stretched across the horizon, a cradle shaped from knowing. He understood. There was nowhere to go, only somewhere to be. He turned back once, looked across the deck, saw the faces again, not solemn, not smiling, at peace, complete. Then, without jump or push, he stepped forward, and the ship exhaled. One long, soft breath that passed through every beam, every rope, every shadow, as if it too had been holding in its own silence for years. The man drifted into the glow. His form did not vanish. It loosened, like ice returning to water, like sound returning to thought. And the moment he did, the mast blossomed. Not with leaves, with light. Fine strands of it curling upward, weaving into a crown of warmth, spilling out across the space where sky once was. And in that blooming, quiet as snow, gentle as dusk, the ship shimmered once more, and then paused, perfectly still, waiting for nothing, holding everything. The ship was gone, but only in the way a song ends, not with silence but with resonance. Long after the final note fades, its shape lingers in the ear, in the chest, in the quiet spaces we carry. So it was now. No boards, no sails, no names, only the outline of what had been. And that outline held, suspended in a place without wind, without direction, where the only motion was memory, curling like smoke through a cathedral at dawn. There, in that hush, the world listened, not for answers, for balance. And slowly the space once filled by wood and breath and quiet voices began to fill again, not with people, with their impressions. First came the sound, a faint rustle like pages turned gently by a hand no longer present. Then light, thin, diffuse, pale as the inside of a pearl, curling upward from below, rising not in beams but in threads. As if woven by thought, each one contained a gesture, a glance between friends, the clatter of a spoon, the shift of a boot on frost. These gestures reassembled themselves into rhythm, a silent choreography of what had once been lived, and then shapes, not bodies, not souls, shadows of presence, soft silhouettes formed from breath and belonging. They circled each other without touching, not lost, not seeking, just being. Among them, a chair that had always sat by the rear mast, its worn legs now glowing faintly, as though warmed by countless hours of waiting. A length of rope, still coiled in a perfect spiral, hovered just above the invisible deck, no longer useful, yet too meaningful to dissolve. And in the air itself, the scent of cedar, of boiled wool, of salt long settled into grain. The sky, now fully open, revealed not stars, not constellations, but patterns, as if someone had drawn thoughts in chalk upon velvet, lines of motion, curves of returning, each gently glowing with knowledge not meant to be understood, but remembered. From within that sky a pulse, one soft thrum, not of power, of welcome. And with it something began to return, a spiral, not made of wood or stone, made of memory. It hovered where the deck had once been, formed from tiny motes of light, each no larger than a grain of sand, circling inward. And as it turned, it began to hum, low, tender, a tone known only to those who have ever been held when no words were needed. From the edge of the spiral, figures approached. Not many, just 3. They did not walk. They emerged, as if pulled gently from the light itself, each one different, tall, small, stooped, yet sharing one thing, the shimmer of those who have passed through. They stood beside the spiral and did not speak, but their presence spoke volumes, not in language, in understanding. They had come not to rebuild, not to mourn, to remember. And in that act of remembrance, the space itself began to respond. Above them, the sky turned faintly gold, not bright, gentle, as if the light itself had begun to weep softly, not from grief but from recognition. Something once separate had become part of everything again. The spiral widened, its hum deepened, and one by one the shapes within it grew brighter, then thinner, then gone, not vanished, joined, folded into the cord that held this place steady, a vibration so pure it needed no name. Stillness became structure, silence became story, and the place where the ship had been, where breath once steamed against the cold, now shimmered like frost kissed by morning. There was no more time, but not because it had run out, because it had been folded, pressed carefully, like linen sheets tucked into an old cedar chest, carrying the scent of yesterday. The sky now pulsed in slow waves, gold into pearl, pearl into dusk, as though it too breathed in rhythm with what had once been breath. At the heart of it all, the spiral remained, its lines thinner now, more transparent, but steadier, like thread spun from a child's voice remembered long after the child is grown. Around it, the 3 figures still stood. They had not moved. They were not waiting. They were anchoring. One of them, tall and wrapped in something like cloth but made of glow, slowly raised a hand, not in command, in greeting. A shape rose from the spiral, small, familiar, the outline of a boot. It turned gently in the air, casting no shadow, only warmth. Then another shape, a spoon, bent slightly at the handle. Then a torn mitten, stitched unevenly with red thread. Each item rose like a note in a song too old to sing aloud, and hovered briefly before melting into light. Not lost, carried, witnessed. In that moment the sky deepened again, its color shifting into shades of memory, not colors known by eye but felt behind the eyes. The tone of midnight blue when you think of a voice you haven't heard in years. The gray lavender hush of a snowfall that muffled your name. And the gold, always the gold, not as glare, but as permission. Below, the spiral began to draw inward, not shrinking, concentrating, like a final breath taken not in fear but in fullness. The figures stepped forward. One laid a hand upon the spiral. The second bowed their head. The third simply closed their eyes. And the spiral responded. It curled once, twice, then split. Not apart. Open. Inside, nothing. Not void. Not darkness. Nothing. The space before anything. And into that space the spiral poured itself. Every thread of light, every note of hum, every shimmer of footfall, every curl of remembered laughter, every soft hiss of wind around a frozen hull, all of it, drawn inward, returned, and the figures watched, not as guardians, as kin. Then, silence. Real silence. The kind that lives only where everything has been said. Not absence. Completion. The sky did not flare. The ground did not shake. Nothing burned. Nothing burst. There was simply stillness, and in it, presence. Like something sacred had passed through, touched every part of this quiet world, and now rested. One of the figures turned, faceless yet full of expression, and looked beyond, toward a horizon that no longer marked direction, but story. They stepped forward, onto what could no longer be called ship, nor sea, nor ice, just space made of memory. The others followed, and where they walked, the air folded gently like pages turned by wind in a book not meant to end. A single snowflake fell, slowly, perfectly formed. It landed upon the place where the spiral had vanished, melted instantly, and in that melting a new sound emerged. Not hum, not bell, a breath, inhaled, held, waiting. The breath held, not by lungs, by the world, as if every grain of frost, every thread of light, every shimmer of old footsteps had drawn in together, quietly, reverently, and paused. The horizon glowed faintly now, a band of barely there color stretched thin like silk, its edge wavering not in uncertainty, but in becoming. There was no ship, no crew, no mast, and yet what had once been, the lines, the weight, the voice of the vessel, remained like the scent of smoke in wool after the fire has gone out. Presence without form, stillness without still. The three figures, tall, bowed, and closed-eyed, had continued walking, but now they stood again, not at a destination, in acknowledgement. Before them, a circle, drawn not in ink or ash or snow, but in warmth. A simple glowing ring etched upon the air, hovering just above where the spiral had once opened. It pulsed once, then again, and with each pulse something gathered, a sound, soft, organic, like water dripping into a basin in an empty room. But it did not echo. It joined, each drop merging with the last into a slow rhythm, not of time, but of return. The circle brightened. Within its center, shapes began to form, not artifacts, not memories, seeds, tiny at first, then fuller, each one a curl of possibility, wrapped tightly in stillness. They hovered for a long moment, suspended, and then, gently, they began to fall, downward, slowly, like feathers carried not by wind but by breath. The figures did not catch them. They stepped aside, allowed them to land, and where each seed touched the invisible floor it sank slightly, not vanishing but settling, finding its place. No soil, no rain, just readiness. They did not sprout, not yet. They waited, in trust. Above them the sky curved in deeper arcs now. It was no longer sky. It was cover, a dome of soft motion, rotating almost imperceptibly, like a lullaby hummed by the stars themselves. No sun, no moon, only that glow, consistent, calm, and listening. The tall figure stepped into the circle, not to disturb it, to join it. They placed a hand on one seed, whispered something only the silence could hear. The seed pulsed once, then dimmed, then steadied, not dying, sleeping. The other two joined. Each took a place. Each found a seed. Each whispered. And now the air itself thickened slightly, not heavy, alive, like the moment before a snowfall, when everything holds its breath in weight of softness. The ground responded. It did not change. It remembered how to change. A faint vibration began beneath the ring, the rhythm of roots that do not yet exist, already dreaming of depth. From the center, a glow rose, not blinding, curious. It hovered just above the circle and began to expand, slowly, evenly, forming a sphere, not of fire, of promise. And within that sphere a shape moved, small, curled, breathing, alive, not a man, not a child, a beginning, asleep, yet whole. It turned once as though shifting toward warmth, and the light around it shifted color, now tinged with soft green, a hue that held no season, only the idea of one, and beneath the watchers the ground no longer waited. It welcomed. The sphere hovered, perfectly centered within the ring of seeds, within the hush of space, within the pause of a world that had stopped measuring itself in time. It pulsed gently, once, then again. Each pulse echoed outward in waves so soft they could not be heard, only felt, like a heartbeat carried through the soles of the feet. Within the glow, the shape stirred, not in struggle, in rhythm, as if the world outside had finally slowed enough to meet the pace of its becoming. The three watchers stood motionless, but around them everything moved, not visibly, not grandly, subtly. The faint shimmer of frost returned to the edges of space, not cold, just present, just enough to hold memory. Above, the sky thickened slightly, not with clouds, with density, like parchment brushed with water becoming more real with weight. And within that denser air, faint lines began to etch themselves, curving, layered, circular, the patterns of old drift maps, of stars plotted and forgotten, of stories told by men who had nothing but sky and hunger and time. These lines circled the glow, not trapping it, naming it, but not in words, in shape, in tone, like drawing a breath before speaking a name you haven't said in years. And still, the figure inside the sphere slept. But it began to hum, not audibly, in presence, in the way a curled leaf holds the shape of the branch it once belonged to. The seeds, still sunken in their invisible soil, brightened faintly in response, each one holding its own color, not rainbow, not flame, more like the muted hues of twilight pressed into stone. Their glow was not immediate, it was patient, and the glow of the sphere recognized them, accepted them, as kin. The tall watcher stepped forward again, kneeling this time. They placed both palms on the invisible floor, their head bowed not in submission, but in reverence. A breeze stirred, the first since stillness had fallen. Not wind, not air, something finer. It passed over the seeds, the sphere, the watcher, and where it passed, the floor began to hum, very low, very old, as if the bones of the ship, now long vanished, were still singing beneath everything. The sound was neither sad nor joyful, it simply was. A continuity. The hum grew, so softly that it felt like the body remembering a song from childhood. And then the watcher lifted their head, opened invisible eyes, and whispered, "Now." The seeds pulsed once, then cracked, not loudly, with the softness of paper torn by gentle fingers. From each, a single thread of light rose, not plant, not fire, possibility. The threads moved inward, weaving around the sphere, not to bind, to cradle. They did not touch the sleeping shape. They touched each other, forming a lattice, a cocoon, a nest. The other two watchers joined, and together, without word, they extended their hands toward the glow. And from their palms, feathers, small, black, irregular, like those of birds long extinct, the feathers drifted forward, one by one, and landed upon the lattice. As they did, the glow within softened, less pulse, more breath, more presence, more readiness. And then the figure stirred again, this time a shift, a curl, a sound like breath passing through lips not yet shaped for language. The watchers did not react. They only stepped back and bowed. The hum faded. The breeze slowed. The sky for a moment went still, and in that stillness something opened. Not a door, not a gate, a moment. It hovered in the air, delicate, pale, balanced, waiting to become. The moment hovered, still, open, not like a door left ajar, but like a breath held before the final note of a song, the kind of note that never truly ends, only fades into what comes next. The sphere shimmered once more. The glow inside it, no longer centered on the sleeping shape, began to recede, not dimming but giving space, a kind of quiet blessing. The threads that formed the lattice remained, soft, interwoven, alive. They did not dissolve. They waited. The figure within stirred again, limbs lengthening, uncurling, a stretch, slow and effortless, like one who has never known gravity. There were no eyes to open, and yet it saw. There was no mouth to speak, and yet it was heard. A tone rose from the center of the cocoon, not from voice, from presence, from being. It resonated gently across the seeds, now silent and spent, across the watchers, now still as stone, across the space that once held a ship. The tone said nothing, but everything listened. And then, movement. Not from the sphere, from the sky. It parted, not broken, not opened, revealed. A path, faint and wide, curving upward. Not a road, a direction. Soft arcs of color drifted along it. Pale rose, deep blue, faded gold. Each hue a memory, a kindness, a story once whispered and never repeated. The figure inside the lattice lifted gently. The cocoon held, not as cage, as cradle. The watchers lowered their heads. Their glow softened, then thinned, like candle flames shrinking as wind begins to rise. One by one they stepped backward. Their forms faded, not into darkness, into stillness, until only the cocoon remained, and above it, the open path. Then, without sound, it began to rise, slowly, gracefully, drawn not by force but by invitation. The feathers placed upon the lattice fluttered once as they ascended, then stilled. Below, the circle of seeds pulsed one final time, a farewell, and then their glow extinguished. No longer needed, no longer waiting, just quiet. The cocoon rose higher, past the place where sky had once become map, past the arc of frost where voices once hummed, past the memory of decks, of hands, of stone coiled in spiral. It passed into the place where light forgets its shape, where silence is not absence but atmosphere. And when it reached the edge of perception, it did not vanish. It unfolded, like a flower pressed in a forgotten book, opening not to bloom, but to be seen once more. The light diffused, the threads scattered, and within them, nothing, not loss, release. From far below the hum returned, very soft, very deep. But this time, it came not from the world, from the listener, from you. It echoed in your chest, subtle and warm, like the weight of a wool blanket pulled to your collarbone. The breath you took was slow, and the stillness you felt, complete. There is no ship now, no expedition, no frost, only warmth, only hush, only the quiet understanding that nothing truly disappears. It changes, becomes story, becomes tone, becomes sleep.